Lower interest rates translates directly to increased borrowing capacity. And in an affordability crisis, like we live in a world now where there's so much knowledge, understanding, people really know about valuation, all of that. You can just go on realestate.com and see all the properties that have sold. Don't meet that mold of just the regular house that's easy to value. How we create value for our clients is identifying those types of strategies, going through researching that market in incredible depth.
Welcome to another episode of Founders in Finance, where every episode we dig deep into the insights that shape financial success in Australia, with the real conversations with business owners, investment experts, professionals, and everything in between to bring you the real-world stories and insider insights to understand the financial world today. Whether you're a small business owner, an inspiring investor, or simply looking to strengthen your financial foundations, there's something here for you. I'm your host, Ross Pocock, co-founder of Sternlight Financial, and today I'm joined by Chris. Chris here is the founder of Lucid Property Investors and is a buy-ready dude predominantly based in Brisbane. How are you today, Chris? Thank you for joining me.
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So obviously, property is a cornerstone of many Australians' wealth, whether that's in their home or investment properties. So tell me a little bit about why you got into becoming a buyer's agent and where you really find the value is within buyer's agents.
Sure. Look, I've been doing buyer's agency stuff for about 5 years, but I've been involved in property acquisition, around property development, that type of thing for, a bit over 20 years now.
Plenty of wealth of experience then.
Yeah. I've seen a few. I've seen a few market cycles. Seen a few things over the years. Absolutely. Um, and yeah, how I got into it, it was actually by accident that I got into it. It was in during COVID, just the start of COVID stuff. And a friend of mine had a buyer's agency Australia wide, and he'd just lost his Queensland manager, the person running his Queensland office. And at that time, he couldn't fly up to Brisbane and had nobody running the thing. And so he asked me, "Hey, can you just, for as long as it takes, come in and just run it?" And I was like, "I've never been a buyer's agent. I don't know anything about this." He's like, "Oh no, it's really easy. It's really, really easy. You've been doing way harder stuff than this. You'll be fine." And so I went into it, and I came into it with a very different hat, I think, is what's made it successful. I came in with this idea of, how can I uh, hack the system a little bit? How can I get property investors better outcomes, significantly better outcomes than what they would be buying property on their own? And I took the whole thing, very, very seriously. And I guess it got to that point where I maybe even overshot the mark a little bit. Of I was just so committed to this. How can we beat the system and get better investment properties and sort of guarantee that for clients, that type of thing? And so, yeah, it's been, quite successful coming in with that energy and that attitude, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you talk about during COVID, we've seen a massive property boom within since COVID, given the low interest rates and the growth on that. Now, one question I often get from my clients, and I'm putting you a bit on a spot here with your crystal ball, um, do you see another property boom like we had during COVID happening again and anytime soon? Again, as I say, a big crystal ball here, but I'd love to know your views on here, and we won't hold you to it.
Thanks. Um, I I see in the short term, especially with the expected interest rates, going down, and we're in the middle of this Trump tariff stuff as we're recording this, and just for context for anyone watching this, and so this morning there's reports coming out saying that there's the bond market has priced in 5 interest rate decreases this year, which whether that happens or not, unsure. But if that does happen, obviously lower interest rates translates directly to increased borrowing capacity. And in an affordability crisis like we are undoubtedly in now for the average person, definitely in an affordability crisis for the average person, that I guess increase in borrowing capacity is going to open the door for many more people to invest in property. And due to that, I do see a price increase in that short to medium term.
Yeah, definitely. And uh, like you say, affordability crisis there. What measures do you see the government doing to help? They constantly talk about, we've got the election coming up, they constantly talk about we're helping more and more people get into their homes. Do you see them actually making too many major changes within the property area to help everyday Australians get into new homes, or do you think it's just around the interest rates allowing more borrowing capacity?
Look, I absolutely think that the government intervention is going to make things easier for the first home buyer.
Yeah,
Definitely. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword because I guess for them it's like, oh, we're in a housing affordability crisis, and if we're helping one end of the market, this first home buyers, which, to be fair, are probably the ones that need the most help,
yeah,
that helping them is going to increase demand overall, which surely increases prices somewhat. I think what I'm really interested to see is the cap at which the first homeowner grants, that type of thing, are actually operating in.
yeah,
What I see is at the moment in Queensland, we're at $700,000 for this. I guess it's a grant where I don't know if grant's the right word, but um, if you are buying something at $700,000 or under, I think you've got borrowing capacity up to 95% LVR, something like that, no stamp duty. That's great, but the bigger question is how many properties can you really get for under $700,000 now, especially something that you'd really want to buy? So I guess it turns into a question of expectations of, are these first home buyers going to drop the big dream of, oh, we're going to have a nice house on a block of land in the area we want to live? Or do they go, we've got to buy something in an area we don't want to necessarily live in to start off with? Or do we buy a unit or a townhouse and, take that as our first step into the market?
yeah, definitely. It's we've seen it an awful lot. People trying to come to know. I was over talking to a client yesterday, first home buyer, fairly young, and their borrowing capacity is just completely eliminating them. And then this really feeds into the next question in terms of growth within different property sectors. So you've got, I saw an interesting stat, and I haven't clarified whether this is true or not, and you might be able to give me a bit more insight. But apartments, I saw that saying one in two apartments in Melbourne have lost money in the past 10 years. So I would like to know if you know any more about that, how it looks in the Brisbane market regarding the apartment world.
Yeah, look, that's a really interesting thing, and I don't doubt that for a minute. Melbourne, that we see now, in terms of their affordability in the whole country, in my opinion, they're absolutely the most affordable market to get into. A big part of that is the government's been really successful in releasing land, buildings, or sites to build apartments on. And so there's not quite the undersupply in the Melbourne market as there is in others. However, going back to exactly what you asked about these apartments that for over 10 years have actually not seen any growth at all, it's I guess those investors have been caught in a trap. They've been caught in this marketing trap where they get sold the dream about this new apartment building that's going to be this and that, and it's going to be this best thing, and they get all excited. They get a rental guarantee, and they they get swept up in that and think this is going to be the best thing. And when they buy into that building, yeah, okay, it's the new hot building for a little while, and then give it 2 years, and then the next ones come, and their one's no longer in demand. They're building so many of these apartments that there's not that much demand for the rentals, nor for the for owner occupiers purchasing them, which then translates to investors. And so, yeah, there's I guess they've been sold a bit of a porky pie about how those investments were going to go over the long term.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've seen some of the numbers on those contracts things, and it does shock me. And unfortunately, this is part of the reason why I wanted to get you on to debunk some of those myths and talk about the property markets and what people should be careful of. Now,
Yeah.
if we talk about lucid property investors, and you talk about how passionate you are about it and using your 20 years experience in there. So, what's your process in finding new properties that might be different from other buyers agents out there?
Sure, sure. So I guess for me, there's a couple of big, I guess, investment principles that I work off. The first one is this term of complexity creates opportunity. And what I mean by that is if you imagine an apartment or if just like, or even a house, imagine a house in somewhere like Springfield Lakes, which is a big master plan community in Brisbane, about 30 k's from the city. It's fine, but it's dominated by a lot of similar housing types.
Yeah.
Um, all the streets, there's not that much differentiation, and so with that we live in a world now where there's so much knowledge, understanding. People really know about valuation, all of that. You can just go onto realestate.com and see all the properties that have sold. And so when a property like that comes up for sale, there's very little variation in what somebody is going to see as the high or the low price of that
Yep.
because there's only so like the data will only give you so much variation because there's been so many sales, so much probably similarity in those sales that even if you go and buy one of those properties and you buy it well, you might only be getting it for a couple of percent under what the true market value is. However,
Yep.
you take a property that's a little bit more complex and the highest and best use is not immediately uh, super clear. There's no direct comparable sales. There's some potential constraints or things that someone may misunderstand in the property. Uh, in that, there creates this huge gap of where somebody could see the high and the low price of that because there's not a lot to work it off. And so that's the first foundational principle that I work off is identifying properties that don't meet that mold of just the regular house that's easy to value. And so how we create value for our clients is by identifying those types of strategies, going through researching that market in incredible depth so that we know what would make a property a really good one, what would make it affordable, cheap. We then
Yeah.
review everything on market, off market, and then it becomes really simple of at the end of that process of reviewing them, it's very clear to us, well, which are the overpriced ones, which are the ones about market value, and which are the ones where we think are underpriced and there's additional value to be gained in there. And naturally, we gravitate towards those cheaper ones, put those to our clients, explain our methodology and our research as to why we think it's cheaper or represents better value than the other properties on the market, and it becomes a really easy decision for the client to say, "Oh, yeah, you're right. That is a really good one."
No, that just makes sense in that investment there. And obviously, personal property is often people's first big initial investment into wealth accumulation, or they might be buying their first home, knowing it's not their forever home, so you're looking for it to grow to go to that next step. Um, Often we hear of the right time to buy in a sense.
Mm.
What's your view around that terminology? When is the right time to buy?
I don't. Yeah, I'm not a big advocate for trying to time the market. I think if there's
Yeah,
capacity there, it's a little bit like stocks. If time has shown that if you go in and buy stocks over the long term, that will be a very profitable thing to do, regardless of market ups and downs. And I think the same in property. In property, we don't see quite the amount of sharp upturns and downturns.
Yeah.
However, yeah, there still is market cycles there, and of course, there's better times to buy, but I just think that nobody has that crystal ball, and I'm not a big advocate for trying to time the market because I think it's really hard to do.
Look, I completely agree. And in terms of when's the best time to invest? 10 years ago. When's the next best time to invest? Today.
Sure, exactly.
Because no matter when you look back at the past 75 years in markets, there's always been ups and downs, but it's always recovered in that sense. And very similar to the property, but the key thing here is buying quality and not just buying anything, because that's where people can end up in a bit of trouble by just buying anything in those times. So I find that very important. Now, you are a business owner, and we do talk about founders and finance in this set. So I'd love to pick your brain as a business owner here and talk about since you started with the property, what would you find be your biggest hurdle that you've had to overcome, or your major setback as a business owner?
In my business, by far the greatest hurdle that I've had to overcome, other than myself, of course, and my own anxiety and fears around things not working out or whatever, the business now
Yeah,
is about this particular business is, I think, about 2 years old now. But
yeah,
the biggest one for me is I have this balance of having enough clients and having enough properties.
yeah,
That's the hardest thing for me to manage in my business by far. I said earlier about the types of properties that we buy. They don't just grow on trees. There's not a lot of them. So I have a small business. It's the number of properties available that meet my extremely high perfectionist criteria for being an excellent investment are quite low. And so yeah, there's this balance of if I ended up having 15 clients on board, I wouldn't be able to serve them. And
yeah,
so I try to balance that because I don't want to sell somebody to come into the business as a client and then put them at the back of this queue that's going to take 3 months for them to even get a look in. And so, yeah, for me, it's balancing having the available properties and enough clients at the same time is difficult. And I've probably found more than anything the most difficult part being enough properties rather than the client side. But yeah, that by far has been the biggest challenge for me in this business.
and it makes sense. It's in that sense that the frustrating thing of that would be it's so out of your control in terms of actually getting those properties on the market. If some of these areas weren't so landlocked and things like that, there might be more available, but that's not something you can control as a business owner of those properties. You can keep doing the research, but it's not something that you can actually pull the lever on and just make new properties that fit that category. So
Exactly.
um,
It's difficult. Yeah.
it would be a frustrating thing there. Now, in terms of where you build, do you focus mostly on Queensland, or what areas do you look at yourself?
Yeah, look, it's generally a Southeast Queensland focus
Yeah,
for now. There's definitely considerations of expanding that. However, I want to make sure that if I am expanding, that there's an equal market understanding in those other locations that we've got in Southeast Queensland.
yeah,
And I think that's a really important thing. It's very easy to go and buy properties in other locations. However, if there's no market knowledge and expertise there, and you're just relying on data or a property that looks good, I think that's a recipe for disaster.
yeah, definitely. You want someone kind of on the ground, actually knowing the
Yeah,
market, knowing what they're investing in, what they're investing their clients' money in. So you have that, you can kind of put your name against it and say, look, we would buy this if it was us, type thing.
yeah, exactly. And so, considering that expansion into other locations, I'd probably feel more comfortable partnering with somebody local. And the idea I've
Yeah,
had is, all right, we can use my property smarts and expertise and apply that in another market with somebody who has that local understanding of that location, rather
Yeah,
than coming
definitely.
in and making assumptions, because assumptions can be pretty dangerous.
No, they definitely can. Now, before we wrap things up, I would like to ask you, what value do you think you bring as a buyer's agent or the buyer's agent's network to someone that might be looking at buying an investment property or a home, rather than them just going out and searching themselves? What value do you think that you really bring for them?
Yeah, good question. And I'll try to answer this while retaining some humility. Uh, there's a reason that we haven't really discussed on this show, I think, the exact strategies that I do. And I think a big part of that is I rarely end up talking about them publicly, because the thinking behind them is really quite complicated, and it's just simply not available to the average person. The types of things that we buy, no average person is going to buy those with the same type of thinking that we do.
Yeah,
This is so far from the, oh, we know the new hot spots and this area is going to go up faster, or we are really good negotiators. It's like, yeah, sure, like that stuff's there, but it's the actual strategies that we use are really sophisticated, very, very highly considered. We only have 3 or 4 different strategies that we're doing at once. The
yeah,
research and analysis that we do around those strategies. Like I often say that I'm not really a buyer's agent. I'm just a property analyst and researcher, and so is my team. And the answers that machine that we created, this property analysis machine, spits out the answer of this is the best property to buy for an investment.
yeah,
And so the amount of research that we do is, to be quite honest, ridiculous.
yeah.
But I'm a perfectionist. I really care about the results and making sure that the offer that I've got in the market is a lot better than what anybody else can do. And I mean anybody else in terms of competitors, or just, the clients doing it on their own. And so that's the value that we bring, and we've consistently shown for our clients over the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And I love that, because I do generally believe that if you're not in your business to be the best at your business, why do that? We don't need more average of certain areas. So um, I really do respect that. What you bring is far better than your competitors for that reason. So I do respect that. Now, before the end of any episode, we always like to give the opportunity for people to and provide a plug. So that might be a plug about your business, about yourself. So the stage is all yours if you want to plug away.
Sure. Thanks, Ross. It's really simple. If you're in the market for an investment property, you are considering how the best way to do that, I'd say just get in touch. The best way to do that is via the website, lucidpi.com, and you'll be able to find ways to, send us a message or something from there. It's just worth a chat. I think you might be surprised by the types of properties we buy, how we buy them, and what we look for.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll provide the link at the bottom of the video, so anyone can just jump onto that website. Now, at the time of this recording, I understand there's a lot of fear in the markets in terms of stocks and stuff. So that's a Sternlight. If you do have any questions or worried about anything, feel free to give us a call. There's no cost just to pick up the phone. We're happy to have a chat and talk about what's going on. We always say our number one priority is people's peace of mind and their finances, making sure they're on track. So feel free to call that Sternlight and like and subscribe to this podcast. Thank you for your time today, Chris. And I look forward to catching up in the future.
Thanks, Ross.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.